Well, I do love psychology, and one of the interesting topics that I've come across when learning about psychology is the concept of shadow work. I encourage you to Google shadow work to find the essence of it. Now, this reminded me something that I learned from one of my pastors when I was coming up. The pastor was talking about something called soul retrieval that has to happen during deliverance. She was somebody who had a gifting in the area of deliverance, and this is something that she was telling me about the process of deliverance, that when a person has been delivered, the minister has to do something further after the deliverance, and that something is the soul retrieval. According to her, which I do, I could say that I have proved to have truth in it. When a person gets possessed by a demon, their soul is usually, or not exactly their soul, but parts of their soul. You'll find that part of their soul has been possessed, or has been taken away from that person. Now, in psychology, this is what you'll hear, and this is why I find psychology so interesting. If I had time, I think I will delve deeper into psychology. Now, in psychology, shadow work is the process whereby a person who has experienced a traumatic situation goes back by imagination or by spiritually. You notice that I use a lot the word imagination, because the word imagination is it's more convincing. If I tell a person imagine this, they will immediately imagine. But if I tell them that is spiritually do this, they may take time to get what I'm trying to say, because the spiritual has been so convoluted, confused, and so complicated by scholars. Maybe I'm one of them, to the extent that it's becoming, including the concept of faith, it's become something that is out of reach by virtue of the philosophizing a very simple concept. Now, shadow work works like this. And I've seen, because I've been looking at what these psychologists and psychiatrists have been doing. Or is it, I think they're psychologists, not sure. Psychiatrists are usually people with a higher qualification. Confusing semantics there. But anyway, so what happens to people who are going after their shadows is that they imagine themselves in the beginning of where everything fell apart. Now, I'll give you an example. Have you ever been crossing a road and a car approached you so suddenly that you did not see it, and what you felt was like something left you? Now, that That is trauma. That is exactly what trauma is. And what happened in that situation is that something actually left you. A part of your soul actually left you. So if you listen to what psychologists are saying, is that the human body has a tendency, or the human spirit has a tendency to preserve itself when it feels in danger. And this preservation is done by splitting into individual fragments of yourself. So and this is something I've learned. For example, and this is how to tell that you have a fragmented soul. Now these fragments, before I continue, remember, when your soul is fragmented, it means that you have parts of your soul that are separated from your wholeness. This means there are parts of you that are even more vulnerable in their separation than they were as a whole, because separated, they don't have the wholeness that you do have. And that is why people who have gone through traumatizing situations act in ways that you'll see that there's something missing. Maybe there's a part of them that is screaming for help. Now, that is usually that soul. And it is said that when you have encountered such trauma, if you do not retrieve that soul, according to deliverance ministers, or according to psychologists, if you do not retrieve that soul that was split and separated, it will come back as your, what is usually called by psychology as your inner child. That means a part of you that is very, very protective, to the extent that it doesn't listen to reasoning, because that part of you feels insecure due to the trauma that happened. Now, if you've ever been in that situation that I had mentioned earlier, where a gang almost hit you and you felt something depart from you, I can assure you that from that day onwards, if you don't do anything about it, that part of yourself that departed, which is part of your soul that was trying to preserve itself, will always remain departed, and away, or detached from your wholeness. And that detached part will have a way of sneaking and taking over when you're in circumstances that are fearful or dangerous, because it's a traumatized fragment of you that is continually reliving that time over and over again. Now, retrieval means that you can do this physically. Go to that place and absorb everything that happened to you. Relive that moment again. Or, this is something that I do. I imagine myself in the place, in that difficult place, in that place of trauma. Stand in that place in your imagination. Break every bondage that may be attaching to that fragmented part of you, because these fragmented parts of your soul can be demon possessed. They can be attached to demons because they're not part of the whole, remember. That's why people who have gone through trauma, maybe as little children, or even an adult. I've seen adults who run mad after a gang rape, or an adult who runs mad after an attack by thugs, a serious attack. They lose it. Now that is that soul that feels that they're in trouble. Now, a child who was, for example, sexually molested at 4 years old. Now, this is a child molested maybe by their parent, or maybe most likely an adult at 4 years old. Now, that has a traumatic effect because that child at that time was probably threatened, held down. Their trust was broken. So a part of them splits in order for them to preserve themselves. And the more it happens, the more the splitting, and hence the more the destruction that happens on a little child. Now this child grows up, becomes an adult, 20-something, even 30-something, or even more. But you can be able actually to know the age at which that trauma happened, because that fragmented part will always sneak in whenever that adult feels threatened, or whenever they feel violated. Now, and I've met a lot of people that switch whenever they feel somehow. Some of them could not even be under real threat, but that inability to have to live out or to trust people has created some kind of a paranoia, and the moment paranoia hits them, that inner child will take over and will make decision on their behalf. You will not be able to speak any sense to such people. Now, these are the kind of people who need soul retrieval. And for you to do this, you can do it alone. Remember, this is something very important. That whatever rises against you, God will give you power to overcome it. So you don't need anybody. You can find somebody to agree with, but if you cannot find, don't lose it, because when the children of Israel were possessing their new land, you'll find this as a theme all throughout, that any nation that either stood in their way or attacked them, God gave them as a possession. It's the same concept. Whatever rises against you has been given to you. So, and whatever rises against you considers you equal, an equal foe. Somebody who thinks that you're beneath them will not attack you. The people who attack you, and the battles and the demons that rise against you, consider you a formidable enemy. So act like it. And this is how souls are retrieved. With your imagination, go back, relive, go back to that moment. Go back to the room where the raping happened, where the molestation happened, and rebuke every demon attached to that child that was abused. Break every bondage, because you're most likely to find bondage if, especially if it's a sexual abuse. You'll find that the person who abused that person created a soul tie. That is a tie that you need to break, and you cannot break it until you realize that there's something that you need to separate. Now, separate those ties with your imaginations. Now, with your imaginations, and I've had a lot of videos on this channel, how to use your imagination, your faith. That is your faith being put in action. Remember when Christ, if you do not have the power of Christ in you, I don't know how you can do this, because one of the powers that Christ brought with upon the earth, one of the powers of Christ is breaking of bondage, and that is the chapter that he read in Isaiah, that he came to break bondage, to declare freedom for the bound. Now, that child is in bondage in that room. That spirit is in bondage in that room. Declare every bond that is binding that child to that to that room. Declare every bond broken. Let every bond dissipate. Let the cleansing power of Christ permeate the emptiness of that room. Let it permeate through every bondage. Let it permeate through every soul tie, and let it break. Now, that is how you'll find evil spirits attached to people, and the people will live their lives for years, for decades. People will live their entire lives not knowing. So, do a proper exorcism on that child and reconcile your soul, the rest of your soul, to the soul that was fragmented to you. Because as long as you have parts of you that are fragmented, they remain undeveloped, and most importantly, they remain insecure. Those insecure parts of you will have a way of creeping when you least expect it. Now, do this for every traumatizing experience. Now, some may not have gone through molestation as child, but maybe they went through severe trauma through being abused physically. Maybe you grew up with people who hated you and who took it upon themselves to make your life difficult. That is also a form of trauma. Go to every place where it was you feel like something happened to you that changed you. Go to the first place where you were beaten senseless. That first house. Imagine that you're in that environment, and that child, these fragmented souls, according to psychologists, remain in the places of trauma spiritually. So you have to break them free from those places, and this is how you break free. It is written that Christ is a consuming fire. It's also written that Jesus is the living waters. And what does fire do? Fire purifies. Do you know what fire does also? Fire breaks bonds. That's how metals are melted, by breaking of molecules. guess what else is powerful? Water is also powerful. When John the Baptist was given a mission to prepare for the coming of Christ, guess what he did? Baptism. You know why? Cleansing. He was cleansing their spirits. That's actually what water baptism is about. It's the cleansing of spirit by the washing physically. By faith, you imagine that your spirit is also being cleansed by the living waters, and clean you become. So go to that place of trauma, and I want you to imagine that the cleansing power of Christ, either by fire or by water, you take your pick, whatever suits you. Let it permeate that little child first who was traumatized, or that young adult who was robbed, abused, or that more recent you who missed an accident narrowly, who escaped death by the skin of your tooth. Go to that scene by your imagination and retrieve that soul. Cleanse it. Cleanse that soul from the power of fear. Let fear dissipate. Let the water permeate every corner of that house and diffuse every bond. It is written that God is powerful enough to separate soul and body, and to separate bone and marrow. This is what he's talking about. He's talking about spiritual bonds. Let them be separate by the power of Christ. And those who have gone while listening to me, I command freedom, I command peace to the separated portions of your body. I command those bones to loosen. I command the cleansing power of water to cleanse those traumatized souls from fear. Let them be cleansed from anxiety. Let them be cleansed from trauma. And let them be joined back to you. So that's how souls are retrieved, and everybody should do a retrieval of souls, because remember, most of us go through trauma, and how we come out on the other sides depend on how it depends on some of these things, how well you do. Because you may think that the trauma ended at a young age, when the physical abuse stopped or when the accident ended, but that is not true. The trauma was hidden in that fragmented soul. So retrieve your soul, people of God. Retrieve your souls. Be whole and receive the Spirit of God. Be filled with peace. I command fear to depart from your gates, and I command peace to be upon you. Peace, joy, goodness, godliness, holiness. Let them abound in your houses. Let the shield of the Almighty cover you. His manifold graces arise and live in righteousness. Prosper, people of God.